Alrighty. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you all for coming today to lecture. Today we'll be teaching Flexbox and layouts for our programming, and then for our design section, we'll be going over grids and layouts. Anyways, some announcements. Homework 5 was released today, and then it'll be due next Thursday. Lab 3 is going to be due on Monday, and then homework 4 is due like right now. And then I think a lot of people are kind of concerned about the midterm mock-up check-in. It has been extended to tomorrow, end of the day. We have a few TAs hosting their office hours tomorrow, and if you want to get checked off at the end of lecture today, just like come to the front, and then one of the TAs can check you off. And then the midterm project, as a reminder, is due Tuesday on the 14th at 11:59 p.m. The Google form is on the actual instructions of the midterm project in the index.html file. Yeah, get started. So now I'll just hand it out to David to teach about Flexbox today.
Cool. So today we're gonna do a lecture on Flexbox. So something that you guys might be used to by now is positioning things manually, but as we get to more and more complex designs, it becomes really difficult to do everything like purely manually. So as we can see, positioning things manually is a pain. So like here's the box model again. We have like a lot of different parts of this, and basically you have to individually write out your margin, your border, your padding, and your content, and give it like the correct spacing. And this is really tedious, so we generally don't like doing this. So the way that we get around this in some cases is Flexbox. So if we have HTML that looks like this, we want to be able to tell the CSS that like how we should be positioning everything. So the blue boxes should either be arranged horizontally or vertically. How much spacing do we want in between each box? Do we want the boxes to be at the top or the bottom of the red box? And these are all problems that Flexbox solves pretty easily. So like how do we make each of these different layouts is something that we'll explore in this lecture. So we can do work with Flexbox to align the parent element's children. So in this example, we have the whole container is everything is the dark gray lines around everything. And then we have two flex items labeled 1 and 2. And it's kind of important to note these two lines, this main axis and this cross axis. This will help a lot in how we do our spacing and like aligning things in certain directions. We have our main start and our main end and our cross start and our cross end according to each axis. And yeah, they each have their own size, a main size and a cross size. Any questions on how this is being laid out? Okay. So this is like the basis of Flexbox. You can see how like everything is kind of aligned along the like horizontal axis, and instead of like being stacked vertically. So we can start actually doing the programming for this. So fleshing out by flexing, the first step is to set your display to be flex in the parent container. So the parent container in this case is bestbox, which encompasses the two children elements. And so this allows us to use the Flexbox properties to define how children are spaced. And next we set our flex direction. By default, the flex direction is row. And what this means is that everything inside of this div will be placed like horizontally, like side by side. So that's what comes out. We have like best boxes are big container, and then it contains two child nodes, and each of those are put horizontally next to each other. So like the standard way that this would happen is that we would have vertical stacks, but by using flex direction to be row, we have it like horizontally instead. We can also set it to have flex direction row reverse, and row reverse just means that instead of going left to right, everything just goes right to left. So our first child node starts at the very right, and then the end child node ends at the very left. We can also have flex direction to be column. So flex direction column means that we're stacking them on top of each other, but this helps out with spacing and positioning instead of like having to do it manually. So this helps a lot, as well as column reverse, which is the same thing as row reverse in that the first element starts at the very bottom, and then the last element ends at the very top. Does all the flex directions make sense? Like row and row reverse and column reverse. Okay, cool. Next, we have nested flexbox. So if we want to have one flexbox that contains a whole bunch of different things, and then each of those elements has its own flexbox, then we can use nested flexboxes. So remember how we saw that layouts can be made up of rows of columns of rows? This is happening. So as you can see, the biggest box, best box, is encompassing 2 children, and these 2 children each have 2 pieces of text inside, 2 P elements. So our big best box contains 2 of these that are stacked by row, because we set best box to have a flex direction of row. And then each of the children also have 2 elements, and they're also displayed with flex direction row. So that's why we have a row and then rows inside of those rows. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So flexbox axes with flex direction row. This is really important because it can be really easy to mix up your main and your cross axes. So the main axis is in the direction of the items being added. So for flex direction row, our elements are stacked like horizontally from left to right. So our main axis goes from left to right. In our cross axis, it'll just be whatever is 90 degrees from our main axis. So in this case, it's top to bottom. Does that make sense in terms of main and cross axis? Cool. So in the case of flex direction column, we have our main axis being top to bottom, like vertical stacking, and then our cross axis is horizontally from left to right. Cool. So now getting into kind of spacing things, we have justify content, which is a really powerful part of CSS Flexbox. This does a lot of our centering for us in most cases. So we have justify content center, which puts the 2 elements that we have into the center of how much space they have. So like before, we had these 2 elements on the top left corner, but now we have them at the top still, but they're in the center of that box that they're in. Another option for us for spacing is space between. So space between gives us all of the elements with as much space in between them as possible. So in this case, we have 2 elements. So there's 1 element in the far left and 1 element in the far right. But if we had 3 elements, we'd have 1 in the far left, 1 in the direct middle, and 1 on the far right. Does that make sense for everyone? Okay, cool. Space around gives us a slightly modified version of that, where there's a space on the outside too. So where space between gave us like it pushed against the edges as much as possible, space around gives us an equal spacing on all sides of the boxes. So that includes the edge boxes where there's like nothing next to it. So yeah, that gives us a little bit of flexibility in where we want to place our different elements, and gives us a lot of free range with spacing. Does that make sense? Cool. So in summary, we have justify content, which lets us define how the extra space is being used on the main flex direction axis. And it's important here that we're working in the main flex direction axis. So if we look at this, the justified content is spreading things horizontally because our main axis is in row, which is left to right. But it doesn't do any modification to the space top to bottom. As you can see, they're still like stuck at the top. So yeah, they modify how we use the main flex direction axis. And so these are a few of the different justify content properties. Like flex start, we have, so that is just pressing everything to the left side if you're working in row. Flex end, which is the opposite, you're just pushing everything to the right side. You have center, which puts everything as close together in the center. Space between gives us equal spacing in between each element. Space around gives us that same equal spacing, but with these outer edges also having spacing. And space evenly gives us even spacing around everything. Does that make sense? Cool. So now if we want to work with the space around other around those objects in the cross axis, so whereas our justify content worked left to right in this case, or on the horizontal axis, align items works vertically, so on the cross axis. So we have the same property here, align items to be center, and center just puts everything in the middle of that axis. So in this case, we have our top to bottom, and directly in the middle are our elements. We also have a few more properties. Just like before, we have flex start, which puts it at the beginning of that axis. We have flex end, which puts it at the end of that axis. And so here's everything that we have. We have flex start, where everything pushes up to the top. We have flex end, where everything pushes to the bottom. We have center, where everything stays in the middle. And we have stretch, where every element is stretched to fit the box. And it's important to remember that this is in the cross axis. So in this in these examples, the direction of the flex is along the left to right on our horizontal axis. So it's working on the cross axis, the vertical line. Does that make sense to everyone? Does everyone understand the difference between like main and cross axes? Or is there any questions? Okay, cool. So we can also use them combined, which gives us a lot of freedom with how we place our elements in a box. So for example, whereas like if we had no Flexbox stuff happening, our two children elements in each box would be in our top left corner. But by setting both justify content and align items to be flex end, we make them go to the very bottom right corner of each of their boxes. And this is just applying them like one after the other. So justify content would move it from the left side to the right side, and align items would move it from the top to the bottom. Again, we can do a lot of combinations here. So justify content can have space between and align items to be center. So justify content space between gives us that these two are placed as far to the edges as possible. And then align items tells us that it's going to be in the center of our cross axis, which is this vertical line. So we have a link here for Flexbox practice. This is just a lot of help with getting to know Flexbox. Sometimes this Flexbox can be complicated and you kind of don't really understand what's happening, but it comes with practice. And yeah, there's a lot of resources available. So in this example, this is like kind of like it doesn't look how we want it to look. Maybe we want the lone warrior to be next to the Discord logo, and has invited you to play to be next, right below that, but still next to the logo. And our buttons are all sorts of messed up. They are not placed next to each other, and the text is not centered. So this is what we want it to look like. Can anyone tell me how we can get from here to here? Like any step along the way? Yeah, this is where like Flexbox can get really complicated. Like there's a lot of boxes that we can put here, that makes it work. Does anyone have like any ideas for anything? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think like the first step is to make like the big black box display people's relatives.
Okay. Yeah. I think we want to use Flexbox here. So if we set our display to flex, we can move everything inside of that box. Yeah. 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 So yeah, we set our big box to be flex. Any other ideas? Yeah.
Do a row, sorry, do a row within like decline.
For the accept and decline? Yeah. So these two would be put in a row, like next to each other, right? Yeah, that's a good idea. Any other ideas? Any ideas how we can get this logo and this text next to each other?
Can you show the next picture?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's what we want it to look like. So where the logo is next to all of this text.
So you do a row and then for the text you do
Yeah, great job. Okay. So this is kind of how our thing is laid out. This is like how we want it to look in terms of boxes. One box would be this big top box, and we have our logo and our text inside of it, and they're placed in a row. So our logo is one element, and then all of this text is placed inside one element to make this side by side. Just as like a like study on this, if we had them as three separate elements with this logo, this top text, and this bottom text as different elements, we'd have them all in a line, like 3 columns instead of 2 columns. Does that make sense for everyone? If not, you can ask questions too. But yeah, so that's our big box on the top. Inside of that box, we have this smaller box, but it contains all of our text, which is the 2 pieces of text. And then, yeah, for the bottom, the buttons, like everyone said, we're going to use flex direction of row to set them next to each other. Does that make sense for how we're using Flexbox here? Okay, cool. Yeah, Flexbox can be really useful. You just need to practice with it. Here's another resource for practicing. This is how I learned Flexbox, but Flexbox Froggy is a fun way to just kind of move a frog onto their lily pad using Flexbox. So that's fun. Some other like links and guides. Like we have a whole bunch of different guides to Flexbox. Yeah, Flexbox can be tricky, but just working with it and practicing it is the key to making it go well. Any questions about Flexbox? Cool. We'll go over to design now. What do you